Do you feel the fight? Can you see the encroaching evil as it attacks your family and your community? It's time to rise up with the heart of a warrior and make a stand for those you love. You're listening to The Warrior's Heart. I'm Chuck Black, former F-16 fighter pilot, speaker, and author of 22 books written to strengthen the faith of you and your family. It is my heart to equip you to live for Jesus Christ in this compromised culture of today.
Hi, welcome to the Warrior's Heart podcast. I'm Tess Black. This is my father-in-law, Chuck Black, author and speaker. And today our topic is apathy. Let's jump right into it here, Chuck. What exactly is apathy? Okay. And when we're referring to a follower of Christ, and are there potentially different forms that we could see, but what exactly is it?
Yeah, thank you, Tess. Apathy is essentially a disinterest or care for a particular subject. In this case, we're going to speak specifically to spiritual apathy. There are different forms of apathy. You can be apathetic about your job. You can be apathetic about an important relationship. Mm-hmm. You can be apathetic just about anything that should be important to you. And that's where apathy kicks in. It's when you're not caring about something that you know you should be caring about. Mm-hmm. But I've come to the conclusion that the heart of all apathy is really spiritual apathy. Because if you can solve spiritual apathy, everything else pretty much takes care of itself. Because when you're apathetic about a creator, about a God who loves you, a God who sent his son to die on the cross for you, when you care about that, you care about everything else. You care about everything that he says is important. So that's why when I talk to parents out there in the world, I really focus on what it means to identify apathy and then what we can do to help implement things to keep our kids from falling into that.
Yeah, and I can definitely see the opposite side of that too, right? So if you are fully engaged with a loving creator, everything is going to seem vibrant and exciting. And if you are not, and if you are apathetic, everything else is going to seem rather lackluster.
Absolutely.
And purposeless, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to feel frustrated. You're going to feel sort of that wanderlust, right? Of not being satisfied by any of these other things that we go to when we are apathetic about God.
Right. And you know, there are people that don't have faith that appear not to be apathetic at all. And they've basically been able to tap into a purpose that gives them a sense of belonging and identity. And that's fantastic. And like there are some amazing things that have been done by people that may not have a faith in God. But at the end of the day, their purpose it falls really short. It's really just in and of this world. And when we can solve the problem of apathy through our faith, it's so much bigger.
Right.
It's an eternal purpose. And so I think it just taps into why and who we are as creations of God, as in the image of God.
Yeah. So as someone listening, right, we hear the word apathy and we go, okay, well, am I apathetic? What are some things that you can look for in your own life to be like, wow, am I apathetic? Because I feel like that's one that's a little hard to see sometimes.
True. And apathy is something that kind of creeps in, you know,
right.
Sometimes when you're not expecting it. It's kind of an insidious peril, if you will. So that's a really good question, Tess. I would say it's good to do a check on yourself, you know, do some self-evaluation. I think those are the people that maybe are a little more in tune with whether or not they're finding themselves in an apathetic state. Mm-hmm. For me, I sense apathy and I identify it when I quit doing certain things, like investing in the relationships that the Lord says I'm supposed to be invested in. Mm-hmm. For one thing, my marriage, my wife, or the body of Christ, right, in the church. When I don't feel like participating with the body by either going, to worship service or being on, serving in some capacity there, that's a good sign. Apathy's creeping in. And for parents, that's a complicated thing because, I would say a real sign is not being fully invested in the future of your children or caring about their spiritual state. That's a sign that apathy is really ripening, and you got to be careful about that. And that can come with fatigue and exhaustion and stress and all that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's really good to go to the Lord and help him or ask him to help you find your passion again. There's times I've been apathetic and we'll probably talk about that a little bit too. But I've often found myself when I've done that self-evaluation and I find myself, a little bit on that apathetic side, my prayer is, Lord, I love you and I'm passionate about you, but help thou my apathy.
Right.
Kind of the prayer that the man that came to Jesus about his son who was demon possessed, and Jesus says, all things are possible if you believe, and he says, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And I've found myself praying that numerous times, and the Lord wants you to be passionate about him. So I think that's a prayer he's eager to answer.
Yeah.
So
I think sometimes we find ourselves getting into this rut of you're either apathetic or you're not, right? I feel like this is one of those that can kind of become a scale, right? Like you said, it creeps in.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe the one time where you're tired and you didn't feel super great and you had a rough weekend and you don't want to go to church that morning, right? That may specifically not be apathy.
Right.
It may be that you just had a bad weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think maybe when we start to see that becoming a pattern, and when we see that starting to become more of a permanent part of your life,
Absolutely.
of not wanting to participate in these things, not wanting to get together with believers, not feeling the desire, right? That thirst.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's you explained it very well. It's more of a developing lifestyle, and a mindset. We all get tired. We all get exhausted. And honestly, even being exhausted and tired can lead to apathy because you just don't have the energy to care. So you got to be careful about that, taking care of yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, in all ways. But if those things are in place and you still don't care, then apathy is something that you need to focus on and deal with. So
Yeah. What are some common things that apathy can sort of almost manifest as, right? Because if we're apathetic about God and we're apathetic about, the things that he has called us to be apathetic about, what are some very specific ways that could look like in a person's life?
Sure. I think it probably ties very closely to the things that help us identify if we're falling into apathy, and that is an erosion of a relationship, for one thing. I know when I start getting apathetic, or have been in the past, it's not quite as much of an issue because I don't have a lot of distractions that I used to have, children.
Yes.
But when I dealt with it before, I started to see those relationships struggle, whether it was with my wife or with my children or with fellow believers. And I think that a real good sign of that too is when we start pulling away from the things that we know God says that we're not supposed to. When we start disengaging, and we really. Where apathy leads is an extreme selfishness, and we start turning inward instead of outward. And so when you start to see that happen,
That's kind of the end point,
that's
essentially.
Yeah, you're there. And so, the problem is that our cell phones
Yeah.
are a huge amplifier of that desire and ability to turn inward. We're focused just on ourselves, and we get this little cocoon going. And it's hard to disengage from that. And it's a consumer of so much of our valuable time. And that leads to apathy. Because at the end of the day, especially if you're a believer in the Lord, the Spirit of God dwells within us. It says that our spirit and the Holy Spirit testify that we are one. When we are becoming self-focused and self-centered and apathetic towards the things of God, the Holy Spirit's going to be speaking to us. And even though we're trying to satisfy that with the temporal pleasures of this world, it's empty. Just like it says in Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities. It's all empty, and we know that, and it leads to discouragement, and can lead to depression. Apathy it's a severe silent sin that can cripple.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to throw a quick pause in here real quick.
Okay.
So This is something that we are going to implement into this podcast. And it's just a little something fun because we can get a little dark and heavy sometimes. There are lots of tough topics that we will be covering throughout the course of this podcast. And like in your speaker sessions, you say, okay, everyone take out a picture of a puppy. Let's take a breath. Let's feel a little better. And so we're going to kind of do that here for a second with something that we are twisting a little bit from something that you implemented with your home called the question of the meal.
Okay.
And this was something that you did with your family. You had a question of the meal where everyone got to go around and answer a specific question. It could have been silly. It could have been funny. It could have been serious and deep. And you used this as a way to facilitate discussion and relationships amongst your family over the dinner table. And so we're going to be doing that a little bit here, but instead of question of the meal, it's question of the podcast.
Oh, okay.
Now, you do not know these questions ahead of time, so this is extremely fun for me. Your first question of the podcast is this. You grew up with 6 older siblings. That may be a detail that most people don't know about you.
Okay.
You have 6 older siblings. You are one of 7. What was the best and worst part about having 6 siblings that were older than you?
Okay. Wow, good question. Yeah, this is a surprise. I would say the worst would be my siblings were amazing.
Yes.
They were incredible people. The oldest sibling is a girl, Bonnie, and then I had 5 brothers after that. And they were all kind of rock stars. I mean, they talented, good looking. I mean, and so I was this skinny, scrawny kid following after all these, superstars, and it was kind of tough to find my own niche and feel like I, belonged, because they were amazing and they treated me fantastic. And to this day, we are best of friends, and they have ministered to me in 100 ways. We've lost our oldest brother, and this is supposed to be fun here. I'm talking about my oldest brother, Wes, who is just a spiritual model and a great man. So I would say that was probably the hardest thing, especially as a child, just following on the heels of them. The best thing was probably the same thing. I got to enjoy the amazing reputation that they forged.
Got to ride the coattails a little bit.
I mean, if they, you're Doug Black's brother, or you're Ron Black's brother, or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, yep. I was proud of that. So it was kind of interesting. Probably the best and the worst was the same thing. So yeah, good question.
Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. All right. So jumping back in here now, we're going to switch gears a little bit. So
Okay.
when you found yourself in that apathetic season, right? Or if someone else finds themselves and says, okay, I think I might be apathetic. Okay, what are some actions that people could take? What are some things that they could actually physically do, right? Some tangible actions that they could take to try to work themselves out of, like you said, this selfish shell that's very hard to break open.
Well, the very first step is kind of what we're talking about, is recognition, right? Doing that self-evaluating. And my very first step, like I already shared, was just going to the Lord in prayer and saying, Lord, I know what life is like with you, and I know what life is like without you. I love that phrase in that hymn that says, I'm not going to get it right, but my wandering heart, it's prone to wander, and it's just so true.
Yeah.
And you find yourself, standing out in the middle of the weeds someplace. I say, well, how did I get here? And it kind of starts with apathy. And we'll talk about specifically what the Bible, how the Bible helps us identify it and what the causes are too. But so the first thing is recognition, and then the second thing for me is prayer and saying, Lord, help me get out of this place, because I know that when I'm with you, life is full, and that's where I want to be. But then some very tangible things are disconnect from those things that are pulling you away from the Lord. And it might be social media. It could be video games. It could be
if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, yeah, kind of like that. Obviously, that's more of a metaphor.
A bit extreme.
But yeah, that's exactly what Jesus was getting at. there are activities that each of us are prone to start participating in that will destroy our walk with the Lord. And it can destroy it for a day, a week, or a year, or even a lifetime. And so I think recognizing that and having the courage, right, to make that step, that will definitely have a distinguishing characteristic of helping you get through a period of apathy. And it won't be easy at first. I mean, because, when you're apathetic, you're kind of self-centered and self-focused. Well, the last thing you want to do is go serve somebody.
Right.
But if you start serving some people, serving others, it's a backwards thing. That's not what the world teaches, but that's what the Lord teaches. And so it just helps you pull out of that, and it helps you start to see in the way that the Lord wants you to see. So I would say prayer and serving somebody else, getting involved in a ministry where it's not all about you, it's about others.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So I want to take in something. Now, the Lord calls us to rest. In fact, he specifically sets up a day of rest. Some of us are not as good about doing that day of rest as others.
Who are you looking at, Tess?
I didn't say anything, Chuck.
I'm pretty bad at that. I'll admit that.
But I think sometimes apathy can fall under that guise of, well, I'm just resting. Right? So what could we use as a way to help differentiate between, okay, I am taking a period of rest to restore my soul versus I'm tired and I don't feel like it.
Don't want to do anything.
What?
Yeah. No, good point. I guess a couple things to speak to that. Recognizing when you're exhausted and you need a break, that's just key. I know my point. I know my limits.
Yeah.
But I am terrible at resting, I'll be honest with you. I'm a very, very driven person. It's interesting I'm talking about apathy because I don't struggle with it too often, but once in a while it does creep in. It usually happens when I'm overextended and too exhausted. So, but I have gone through seasons of apathy where I've had to really work hard on making sure that doesn't happen. But as far as rest goes, I would say to differentiate between apathy and rest, apathy in its process draws you away from God, where healthy rest draws you to Him. And so that's the difference between apathy and rest, and by my perspective. And that's why the Lord tells us to rest, right? And find rest in Him, and because that's
and I
very,
think
very
I see
healthy.
rest too as something purposeful.
Yes.
Right? We do that on purpose with a specific action, with a specific goal in mind of I am resting to draw myself closer to God.
Right.
Whereas apathy doesn't have a specific purpose necessarily behind it, right? We do rest with intention.
Yep. I would say that rest serves the spirit and apathy serves the flesh. And so that's
good.
probably the distinguishing characteristic between the two.
I like that. I'm going to have to write that down later on a little note card, stick it on my mirror.
Okay.
So let's say someone has recognized like, oh, I think this might be me, right? And they look back and they see suddenly this, it suddenly opens up before them and they see this period of their life where they have been apathetic. And suddenly there's this guilt and there's this shame that comes in that the enemy is very, very willing to bestow upon us for this time that we, quote unquote, wasted and didn't get to use for the Lord. What would you say to someone who might be feeling that?
Yeah, and we've all been there, right?
Right.
The guilt. I think what I would say is the Lord isn't concerned about your past. He's concerned about your present and your future. And the only past He cares about is that of Jesus Christ when He went to the cross and saved us. And the future He cares about is our future with Him. So forgive yourself like the Lord is willing to, and move forward. I often tell a little parable. I think it's like a Chinese proverb or something. It says, when's the best time to plant a tree? And it's 20 years ago.
I mean, they're not wrong.
Because that's, you think, oh, I want shade here. Well, I should have started 20 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? It's today. And so for those of you that have maybe some regret, maybe your children are even grown and you maybe didn't feel like you did it right, I can promise you that the Lord will use you wherever you're at when you're ready and willing to just buy completely in. It doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter your circumstance. What matters is the change that happens right now, seizing the moment. I've seen fathers with grown children make that commitment, and it's just amazing. It just starts to ripple through the entire family. Even grandparents have such a tremendous impact on their children and grandchildren still. There's just so many things that can be reconciled and healed if you're just willing to plant your tree today.
Thank you for listening to The Warrior's Heart. You can find out more about Chuck's action-packed Christian allegory novels for ages 8 to adults on his website, chuckblack.com. If you want to hear about new episodes of The Warrior's Heart, please hit the subscribe button below, and please hit the like button if you felt strengthened by today's episode. Also, you can stay up to date with the latest of Chuck Black's resources for Christian families, including new faith-building books and audios, by subscribing to his email newsletter. Follow the link in the description below to sign up. Finally, it is our sincere prayer that this podcast would equip you, brave warrior of Christ, to put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand.